Cabernet tends to be the sort of Errol Flynn of the grape varieties.
The most expensive beer in history.
People will turn around to me and say, oh, I'm just making gin while I wait for my whiskey to get ready.
Because wine is an adventure.
Conventional winemakers who just condemn all natural wine as faulty.
The prestigious title of Sake Samurai.
Looking at whiskey in more of an artful culinary way.
They kind of look at it as a novelty more than anything. The guy from the rock bands is making wine.
This is the Drinks Adventures podcast. I'm James Atkinson, and this is the show where I speak to some of the world's most exciting producers of beer, wine and spirits and uncover trends and issues in the drinks industry today. Mr. Black Spirits was founded by distiller Philip Moore and coffee lover Tom Baker in 2013. The duo had the mission of bringing Australian coffee culture into the night with a high-quality liqueur that could take coffee cocktails to the next level. And it seems like they might be onto something. Mr. Black Cold Brew Coffee Liqueur has fast become the coffee liqueur of choice for some of the world's best bars and restaurants. It's the highest-selling Australian spirit in the USA, and in 2021 was ranked as the number 4 top trending liqueur in the world by Drinks International magazine. The company has a brilliant story and some exciting developments on the horizon that co-founder Tom Baker will share with you in just a moment. Tom Baker, thanks so much for joining us on the Drinks Adventures podcast.
Thanks for having me, James. Good to be here, mate.
Now, I don't know a whole lot about your background. I understand that you did have some liquor industry experience before you launched Mr. Black. Where were you working before you decided to go out on your own?
So I started life as a designer, like literally a packaging designer, doing a lot of work in new product development for what I call the whole trinity of fast food, booze and cigarettes for 7 years before starting Mr. Black. So we did a lot of work in coffee as well, but mostly for big liquor companies like Pernod, Diageo and Beam. And we worked all over the world, so in the US, Australia and Southeast Asia. And it was a lot of fun, a great job out of uni. You know, I thoroughly enjoyed it and got to see the world and make lots of great new things for new brands.
And what made you decide to move out of that?
It was back in 2014. I just wanted to build something. Like at the time we were doing so much work for so many booze companies, and you expect in the agency world that not a lot of it comes, ever gets to market, but these businesses were just so burdened by process and the thing that I talk about a lot, it's just like death by focus group. You know, you'd come up with something and then these things would just be focus group to the nth degree and just watered down until there was nothing of the original concept left. And that's why liquor stores wound up with so many products that were just the same and didn't really excite anyone until about 7 years ago, when the craft spirit revolution happened. Which has really forced these big guys to be a bit more interesting. But yeah, it was really just out of frustration for companies that weren't doing anything of value. So I thought, how hard can it be? I'll do it myself. Turns out, really hard. But that was 7 years ago, a bit over 7 years ago now. I wanted to know who. I was really interested in spirits and just literally Googled who was making interesting stuff in the spirits world and came across Philip Moore from Distiller Britannica and walked in there one day in 2014 and then never left. Been there ever since. So, yeah, it's been a crazy wild ride. I quit my job 1st of Jan 2015, and Mr. Black's been my full-time job ever since then.
So how did you, walking into Distillery Britannica, turn into launching a coffee liqueur brand?
It's a really simple story. Like, I thought craft gin was going to be a big thing. I had no intention of starting a business. I just wanted to know more about gin, right? So obviously went and spoke to Phil. I was like, what do you do? You've got amazing products. Like, you're not, like, if you ever met or tried anything from Distiller Britannica, Philip is an incredible distiller. But all his products are only available at the cellar door. I was like, surely you must sell these other spots. He's like, no, not really. And the most remarkable thing I tried that day was the coffee liqueur that he'd been working on. And obviously being a big coffee drinker and coffee nerd, I was just blown away by this product, the same reaction everyone has when they try it, which is like, holy fuck, what is this? It's just so different and better. And I was like, mate, every person that likes coffee in the world is going to love this product. And he's like, oh, do you think? I was like, yeah, cool. So we gave it a name and we launched it online on this crowdfunding platform called Possible. We were the first company in the world to do that, to use a crowdfunding platform to launch a liquor company. All seems like a very, very long time ago now.
That's the very early days of crowdfunding.
Very early days of crowdfunding. And this is like, I think Four Pillars did it after us, maybe 4 or 5 months after us. So we were early. But people loved it, and we wanted to sell a couple hundred bottles just to pay for the first pallet of glass and all that type of thing. But ended up selling 30 grand worth of booze, which for a 24-year-old was more money than I'd ever seen in my life, So that sort of gave us the motivation to think that this could be more than just a one-off thing, that was drunk by my friends and family. Like people, really want it. So did really well and sort of used that money and bootstrapped the business for a number of years to get it going.
And so you sort of invested in the business with Philip and became partners?
Exactly right. So we just set up a business, Mr. Black Spirits, Pty Ltd, and started selling. And in the early years, we just had no idea about the liquor industry, no idea what to do. I presumed you just made a bottle and put it on a shelf and then eventually, Pernod gave you a boat or a yacht or something, but turns out there's a lot of stuff between starting a business and getting a yacht. Still not sure when that comes, but I'm told sometime in the future. But no, generally had no idea what to do. And thankfully, we were able to meet a bunch of people and, Mitch Bushell, and so this quite famous Australian bartender at the time, saw us online and picked us up, and the amazing team at Vanguard, really, boutique distributor here in Australia, picked up the brand and started distributing it, and a bunch of retailers and bars got on board and just sort of went from there. And then, that was sort of the first year and a half, and I was like, well, maybe this has got legs internationally as well. So, that's when I sort of quit my job, quit being a hobby business, and thought I'd put everything into Mr. Black.
Now, there were some legacy coffee liqueur brands on the market.
Yeah.
The two that are most familiar to me are Tia Maria and Kahlua. Mm-hmm. How did the product that you tasted at Distillery Britannica differ to those existing brands?
It's like, it's chalk and cheese. I mean, they both say coffee and liqueur on them, but you wouldn't, side by side, they're completely different products. It'd be like tasting a gin next to a whiskey, they're just completely different things. Mr. Black's made using real coffee and a very large amount of it, far less sweet and with a neutral spirit base. So it just tastes like coffee, where a lot of these other legacy things don't. The premise of the brand is this. It's like the coffee that we drink now is very different to the coffee that we used to drink, right? The coffee industry has exploded. The proliferation of specialty coffee and just the average standard of a cup of coffee in the world has gone up a lot in the last decade. Coffee changed, but coffee and liqueurs didn't. Unlike those legacy coffee and liqueurs, they're very big, very large brands, but they're very sweet and they taste nothing like the coffee that most people drink now. So that's where we come in. People love coffee, and coffee and liqueur is a great category. We just make one that tastes good. And that's sort of, I don't know if tasting good is a niche, but that's sort of where we sort of came into, was like, people love coffee. Let's just make a coffee and liqueur that coffee drinkers want to drink. They're chocolate, very different products. We're far less sweet, far more coffee forward.
How's it made?
Coffee, booze, water, sugar, all good things in the world. So all the flavour from Mr. Black comes from our coffee. We do everything from sourcing the coffees at origin. So our head of coffee flies around the world, tries coffees, we import them, we roast the coffee, and then we cold brew it. So we make like a really intense cup of coffee using a cold brew method, then blend it with grain-based ethanol from a company called Manildra on the south coast that make a lot of Australia's high-quality food-grade spirit, and then sugar. So it sounds really simple, coffee, booze, water, sugar. It takes 9 days from start to finish to make a bottle of Mr. Black, and we do everything from sourcing coffee through to bottling. And the reason why that's important is all of the flavour in Mr. Black comes from coffee. We don't add any other vanilla, caramel, spices, E712, no E number, it's literally just coffee in Mr. Black. And so all that flavour and nuance and depth and character that you get when you try Mr. Black, that lovely rich flavour, all comes from our coffee. So we have to make everything. It's quite hard to make increasingly large amounts of consistently delicious, rich, deeply extracted coffee. And that's what we're good at, which is why we only make one thing.
So does that mean that if you're trying to sort of get, complexity and layers of flavour and everything, that you're blending a lot of different coffees together in order to get that sort of structure that maybe those other brands just kind of throw spices in there instead? Absolutely.
So, broadly speaking, on any given batch, there's 3 coffees in Mr. Black, roasted 4 different ways. So we'll tend to use coffees that have those lovely, robust, caramelised, Maillard, lovely chocolatey coffees. We use coffees that have a high amount of fruit in them. So generally East African coffees from Kenya, Ethiopia, those lovely, rich, high acid coffees. They're just gorgeous and they really give Mr. Black the sparkle it needs. And then we'll tend to use stuff from East Asia as well. Like Papua New Guinea and Southeast Asia, lovely, citrusy, light, nuanced coffees in small amounts. So the coffees change throughout the year, as does where we source them from. But the easiest way to understand is just like really blending everything. We know what flavors we're looking for. We know broadly the characteristics of different regions and we blend them that way. Each coffee is different. They vary batch to batch. So a large amount of work that our head of coffee, who literally has a PhD in coffee, what he does is profiling coffees, testing them, trying them. No two batches of coffee that come in are identical. So we're always altering roast profiles. He just sits there and stares at graphs as these coffees develop, as they roast, and just working out how to get the best out of them. And again, we say craft distilling a lot, but I mean, it's all science. We measure everything. We're like a third decimal point company. Like everything's got to get measured at every step, whether that's moisture, degree of roast, color of roast, pH, dissolved solids in your water, all that type of everything gets measured. And we've been doing that for 7 years. So we have like a wealth of data about how to produce the product.
When you had the product that you were happy with, how did you set about seeing how it was going to play in drinks?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting one. So I honestly had like no idea about one cocktail culture in general or what was happening in that sort of side of hospitality prior to starting the Mr. Black. Like I just wasn't engaged in it. And the second thing about, I had no idea about how people were going to drink Mr. Black. I just thought it was delicious and people should drink it. I had no real concept of how it makes its way into the glass. But when we started, we literally just had a bottle of booze and just walked in the bars, and me and our lovely sales guys and just walked in, and bartenders thankfully could have just put it on the shelf and let it go dusty or not bought it. But they made amazing drinks with it. So early on, again, from a zero cocktail knowledge going into bars, and especially I remember this amazing time we went into Rockpool Bar and Grill in Sydney, and they're like, "Oh, have you ever had like a Negroni with coffee? I mean, that'd be delicious, wouldn't it?" I was like, "Well, I've never had a Negroni, so let's have one of them and then try it with Mr. Black." And it was stunning, and it really like sparked something in my brain that coffee cocktails don't have to be like Irish coffees or mudslides or whatever, the cocktail culture was doing with coffee at the time. Coffee could be nuanced, it could be a flavor as opposed to a liqueur. It could be a bitter as opposed to just some sweet, fatty liqueur, which is what a lot of them were. So yeah, the creativity that we saw bartenders exhibit with our product was amazing, and that fuels the whole strategy really. Like we're a product that's using cocktails around the world.
What were the biggest challenges that you faced early on with kind of essentially creating a new category of spirit?
The challenges with creating a new spirit, really interesting. So when you're new and you're in liqueurs, it's a really tricky thing because you have all the baggage of the liqueur category, right? People, liqueurs, that's like what my grandma used to drink. A lot of people, like it's just drinking coffee and liqueur isn't even in their repertoire. Like, as I think a bartender said to me once when I walked in, he's like, "Oh, artisanal coffee and liqueur, is that what the industry is doing now, right? Finally, have we got to that point, But when you start, you've still got all that baggage. But the best part of being liqueur is, Mr. Black, we don't have to be a coffee and liqueur. We're just Mr. Black, So it sort of gave us this blank canvas to project on what we want. You start an Australian whiskey, you're very much in that Australian whiskey category, right? But when you're just a liqueur, we can be whatever we want to be, and it allowed us to be Mr. Black. So what was baggage for us at the start, being seen as this old dusty product in an old dusty category, really was a challenge. Getting people to reconsider it was just really difficult because most people were like, "Look, I'm not interested in coffee and liqueurs. My customers aren't interested in it. Why should I buy from you?" And then you talk to them, they try it, they get what we're about. Now, 7 years later, they sell a bunch of it. So it worked quite well. But yeah, getting going in a new category, that people aren't particularly interested in, huge challenge, but quite useful when you get a bit bigger and people understand what you are and you really carve out this niche for yourself. Super useful.
You must have really ridden the wave of the Espresso Martini over the last few years.
Can't understate its importance, right? Like it's huge, and ultimately for a business, it's this sweet spot where I have all that stuff I just said about we can craft this new lovely brand for ourselves, but conveniently Australians and increasingly Americans and Europeans love espresso martinis. You know, it's a genuine bona fide modern classic cocktail that's consumed in, you know, huge volumes around the world, and it tastes phenomenal when it's made with Mr. Black. So massively been a beneficiary of that. And I don't have a specific number, but, you know, 90% of the Mr. Black drunk in bars in Australia would be by way of an espresso martini. You know, it's great. And we have an important role to play there. You know, when these things get big, they get commoditized. Brands launch terrible tap systems or pre-mixed RTDs, which are just terrible. And that's what ruins categories. Happens in the wine industry, happens in the spirits industry. You know, as soon as something gets big, the big guys get into it and commoditize it and ruin it, right? So we've got a really important role to play in keeping up this drink and making it good. We have a very vested interest in making sure that the quality stays high and people keep buying them. But yeah, huge. They're massive here in Australia and all over the world.
Now, I tried and was really impressed with your Ethiopia single origin, which came out recently. Tell me about that single origin series. What was the background to it, and what sort of contrast is there between these different liqueurs?
So if, like, you know, we think like coffee liqueur is a niche of the liquor industry, I think single origin coffee liqueurs are like a niche on a niche, right? But part of the reason we exist is to show the liquor world that coffee is more than just a mono flavor. You know, coffee was, oh, there's coffee liqueurs, you know, where it's not. The world of coffee is incredibly diverse. You know, there's more flavors in coffee than there are in red wine, right? It's a very broad church of flavor. And we can tell people that, like I'm now, you know, and go and tell bartenders, or we can make it. And that was really the reason behind the single origin products, was just showing people the diversity in flavor in coffee. The Ethiopian release specifically, it's almost a bit cheating, like, because the Ethiopian coffees are just stunning. Ethiopia is the spiritual, it's the actual birthplace of coffee. It's where coffee came from. But Ethiopian coffees are just stunning. They're high in acid, super bright and fruity and tea-like, and there's a reason why they cost 4 times as much as Colombian coffees do. They're just gorgeous. So doing single origin releases with Kenyan or Ethiopian coffee, it's just a treat for us to do. I get their niche, you know, but the remarkable thing is like how much people love them. You know, we do 3 or 4 a year and they sell out. You know, people just absolutely love what we make. We buy a batch of coffee, we make them. I think it still blows people's minds to do a tasting of 2 coffee liqueurs, a category or a product that maybe people hadn't thought about, to try these 2 things side by side, made the same way. The only difference in the product is the coffee, and they taste so different. And it helps, I think, recalibrate people's brains about what we do. But they're delicious, right? Like it's just absolutely stunning.
What's the difference in how those are made versus the original Mr. Black? So
made the same way, different coffee and different roast profiles. So our classic Mr. Black, that trademark, iconic Mr. Black flavour, is that lovely, dark, chocolatey Maillard flavour. You know, really come medium and dark roast, really get that lovely, intense coffee flavour. The single origin series, all a lot lighter. So we show off less of the roast profiles that we do and more of the coffees that we use. So same process, made the same way, same extraction, same blend, everything after the coffee is the same. We just change the coffees. So much lighter roast, shows off the bean more than the roast profile.
Now, you guys have been in America for quite a while now.
We have.
How's that gone? Because, you know, I've travelled there up until recently. I was travelling there a fair bit.
Yeah.
And I've really noticed how much the coffee culture has really evolved extremely quickly over there in cities like, you know, New York and Portland and LA and everything. So it must have been a good time to go into the States.
Yeah, exporting in general is really hard, right? Like, and I talk to a lot of small companies and they always, you know, oh, how do we get into the US or how do we get in the UK? It's really difficult. And you can really count on one hand the amount of privately owned, you know, international spirits companies, brands that have worked in the US. Like, it's really difficult to do. So why the US, apart from the fact it's a big country that spends a lot of money on premium spirits, they're going through their coffee renaissance. You know, it's like London 10 years ago. It's like, you know, Australia 20, 30 years ago. You know, they're just absolutely embracing coffee culture. And when you come late to something, you don't benchmark yourself off. I mean, they all benchmark themselves off Australian coffee shops, right? You know, Australia is the home of modern coffee culture. I think that's not in question. But when you want to steer with pride. You don't look at the bad coffee shops in Australia, you look at the good ones, right? So they've come into coffee culture quite late, but they've done it really well. And because they have no historical ties to drinking coffee, they're incredibly innovative in the types of products they drink, including cold brew. And cold brew, specifically, is prolific in the US. They're just massive cold brew drinkers, which is crazy because we don't, despite being a very hot country, we don't drink a lot of cold brew in Australia. So kind of there's this perfect storm of, they have a lot of cocktail culture over there. They love spirits, but cold brew is a thing to them. And being a cold brew coffee liqueur, that sort of gave them Americans a point of reference to say, oh, we are different to the category. So all those sort of stars aligned, and we thought the US would be a good opportunity. It's an incredibly difficult market to win in. It's so expensive to play. It's incredibly, incredibly difficult. But when it gets going, it gets going in a big way, and is now much bigger than our Australian business. But that's taken almost 4 years now of blood, sweat, tears, and money to get that to work. But they love it. The product will absolutely work there. Just the flavor profile works really well for them, and just that proposition around cold brew just really works well with the Americans. And in places you wouldn't think, like Florida's our biggest state in the US, for sales. New York, in the before times, pre-pandemic was the biggest one, all driven by the amazing cocktail culture there. But post-COVID, it's all Florida, all retail sales. So it's it's going really well, but certainly not without its challenge over the last 12 months.
When you and I were speaking recently, you were telling me that you actually ended up growing fairly significantly last year in spite of COVID. How did you manage that?
We couldn't have been in a worse spot for COVID. Like, if you look, our February was bigger than our December, in the US, which is rare in the liquor industry. Normally sell a bunch of booze at Christmas. But our growth in the on-premise in bars was just extraordinary. Like, literally thousands of bars were just putting Mr. Black coffee cocktails on their menus. And to lose all that in March and to see our friends' bars close, it was just, tragic, to watch everything that we'd worked for, disappear overnight, literally in March. And all our friends' bars and, business partners over there disappear was horrible. But unlike a bar, we had our ability to sort of work our way out of it. We could still sell just through different channels. So the team just hustled, and we just turned from being a really bar-focused brand, the one that we had no choice but to win in retail. So thankfully, a lot of buyers in the US happen to like Mr. Black almost as much as I do, and gave us a shot and got the product on the shelf. And, we turned from being 80% on-premise in the US to completely the opposite, 80% retail. So we're now distributed nationally in the US with Bevmo and Total Wine and ABC and Walmart and Walgreens, and all these huge brands decided to get Mr. Black on the shelves and sold really well. So, it wasn't by accident. You get nothing for free as an Aussie in the UK, Aussie in the US. You have to work for it, and the team just hustled and we managed to turn it around. But it was crippling in March just to see the sales drop to almost nothing. I think in March I forget the number, but like a double-digit number of cases sold in April in the US for us from quite a big February. So it was just extraordinary to watch that. Everything we'd worked for 3 years or 2 years in the US just disappear overnight. But we turned it around and wound up, even in spite of COVID, a long way up on the previous year, which was great to see, and forced us online and use that pivot word a lot to try and work out how we connect with new drinkers. And we still had to engage in cocktail culture, but in a completely different way. So we have large partnerships with YouTubers now, and at-home mixology is a thing, and online training and new media and podcasts and all this stuff became our world. And we hope to visit our friends in bars soon. But crazy year. Not one I want to repeat anytime soon.
How are you going to accommodate that growth in terms of, production capacity?
Have you seen our distillery by any chance?
I haven't, but
It's tiny.
Yeah.
So it's like we effectively make Mr. Black in like a driveway in Erina. It's covered, but it's not a big space. So most people are amazed at how much liquid we make in such a small space. And Mr. Black, we've never.
But then your actual distillery What are you actually distilling there?
So we don't distill.
Yeah, 'cause you're
so it is a
neutral grain
Yeah,
spirit,
exactly
yeah.
right. So we do require the ability to distill because we make some distillates for some products, like our Amaro, for instance, does use botanical distillates in it. So we'll always require that capacity. But broadly, to make Mr. Black, no distill. It's bought in ethanol. We just require a lot of room, which we don't have. So we need to move out of our current distillery. It's vastly too small for our requirements. But as with these things, when you're a startup, it's not a matter of choice. Like, we just have finite resources, and I'd love to build the shiny new thing, but we certainly this year we didn't really have the option to do that. We had to make some tough decisions on a lot of things this year. But excitingly, in 2021, we're building a new site in Hunter Valley, partly to be near the wine industry, all that talent that brings with it. All our suppliers are up there as well. So that'll be happening mid this year, which is exciting. So purpose-built facility to accommodate our new growth that's happened, which will be great. We'll see how long this one lasts before we need to move out of that as well. But hopefully we'll get a few years before that becomes too small.
Will people be able to visit?
Initially, no. It'll be just a facility to produce Mr. Black. We're a tiny company. Like, I just don't have the capacity, in our team. Like, our ops team is very small. So the idea of building both a production facility and cellar door and all that while trying to manage growth overseas was just too much for us this year. So we will eventually. And probably when we do, it won't necessarily be the brewing and blending part that we show off. It'll be the coffee part, right? So that's the bit I'm personally really excited about building, the Church of Coffee, our cellar door, and really showing people the process starting from the coffee, not just showing some tanks with liquid in them. So that might well happen towards the end of this year as well, if not next year.
What else is coming up for you this year in terms of, are there any new products you can talk about or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a lot of fun stuff. I'm pretty transparent about what we've got coming out. So a bunch of new single origin products, which is great. Really, really exciting for us is our American team did a lot of work with the guys at quite a large whiskey, sort of prolific whiskey company in the US, which I can't name, but that will come out soon. So we've had product in rye whiskey casks for 9 months. So we'll be doing a barrel-aged product, which again, coffee and whiskey is just such an amazing flavour combination. Easily my favourite drink, a cold brew old fashioned, like equal parts rye whiskey and Mr. Black. It's just so good. So yeah, we've got some barrel-aged products coming out. And this year we're doing our first foray into RTD. So we've spent a year developing a ready-to-drink canned product. Doing anything in coffee is really hard. It's really susceptible to oxygen and bacterial issues and lactic ferments and all that. So creating really good coffee RTDs is hard, which is why there aren't any good ones. We've made a good one, so that should be coming out mid-year as well. It's beautiful. It tastes amazing. We've got a few final technical hurdles to get throrough, but that should be coming out mid-year. So a bunch of fun stuff this year.
Like what kind of?
It's coffee in a can, mate. You'll have to wait and see.
Okay.
It's a ready-to-drink product.
Okay.
So super exciting. So that'll be mid-year. But by the time we do some single origins, are ready to drink and build a new distillery, I think that'll max out our capacity for this year in terms of new stuff we can do. Going to be fun though. Oh, and a barrel-aged product.
Well, Tom, been a really great chat. Thanks for your time.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
The Drinks Adventures podcast is produced by me, James Atkinson, with additional production and mixing by Dave Robertson. You can find complete transcripts, links, and other information on the show at drinksadventures.com.au. You can follow me on all social media platforms at @ByJamesAtkinson, like my Facebook page, James Atkinson Drinks Adventures, to be kept informed of podcast giveaways and other news about the show. The Drinks Adventures podcast needs your support as listeners. Please do us a favour and leave an honest review and rating for the podcast on iTunes or Stitcher. We love hearing your feedback, and it helps inform other people this is a show worth listening to. Or simply drop us a line at hello@drinksadventures.com.au.